I'm working on an idea where I'm just trying to figure out some things to do. So I was working on this theme with multiple heads, and what I'm going to do first is to work on it just kind of like this replacement. I'm not trying to go for any detail or anything at this point, and I'm just kind of playing around with the idea. Sometimes I'm just searching around in my sketchbook. I'll put items down just to give myself a little bit of an idea of what direction I might want to go in. I was thinking about just kind of using some movement by just using like vertical strokes. So I'm just making, placing those lines down, and then I'm going to go in and work on the upper section just to lay down some color. Here again, just kind of like working in the these vertical strokes. I don't care whether or not some of the paint gets over the top of the head because I'm working with gouache, and I can go over it again and work back into the images again, so it doesn't matter whether or not I go over some stuff. Just want to kind of get the feel and the rhythm of the work here first. Just laying that paint down. So let's mix it up a little color here and work in between. Just laying in some. I didn't want to go with a strictly white, so I'm just kind of adding a little tone to those areas, but still be like a light value. But I'm just like really right now, I'm just kind of like searching around. It doesn't look like much right now. Looks like balloons with strings on them, but I'm gonna work it out. Sometimes I like to just kind of like play around with stuff until I kind of figure out direction I want to go in as I'm working. Kind of like a give and take or play with the work itself as you're working, and things will start to happen as you begin to work, even with some of the color down. I'm just gonna go back in here again and lay some more tone down, light tones. Work that brush around. Just took some of the lighter washes of the gouache and started. Now I'm just kind of like blocking in the faces, almost as if they were. I'm just kind of like blocking them in, like they were skulls. Just kind of like working the planes, up, nose, eyes. So each one of them is kind of like a symbol. Once I get the rhythm of this thing, and using repetition just to kind of like to give it that kind of like harmony and movement. It's kind of like a way to work those heads. Kind of laying in some of the hair. It's still kind of like one color, one tone, but just enough to kind of like just to give a little feel, a little something to differentiate between those heads. Using some of the more or less like the African American hairstyles. And as I started working on it, I started thinking, I said, oh, it's starting to look like could be like a choir. So that's why I titled it The Choir. And I didn't know it was going to go in that direction until after I started working on it. And now it starts starting to look more like that theme. So like could be like a choir. It's kind of like laying those, working the hairs. Move that brush around. I used a little liberty with the speed of the video. I actually took about 35 minutes to do this. Go back in here and just kind of like block in some more tones, some more of the white, just to kind of like frame out around the necks. You know, just went in and grabbed some tones, some browns, and working the planes a little bit more to define it a little bit. And as I found like the color, if I can use the color in one area, I can go ahead and use it in another. I'm still using like a little bit more of a looser wash. It's not like a very opaque paint at this point, but later I will use a little bit more opaque paint just to define things more. Work those edges. Thought I would try like a warm tone in there and see how that looked. Maybe just exploring. It's in my sketchbook, so if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it's okay. This is the place to really kind of like play around with stuff. It's still in your sketchbook. And see how things work out. Yeah, so went in with a green. Think about the background, the blue, and then the green. Now I'm going into putting a little more detail. Using a little bit more opaque paint so I can define around the eyes and some more of the planes around the side of the face. So I can bring it out so where it looked like just holes now, the sockets now, I can kind of define the eyes themselves. Just continuing to kind of like work that paint around those areas. And just kind of let it build. Letting those shapes build. I'm not trying to go for a full detail at this point. I'm just going to let it grow, let the painting grow. Sometimes it's better this way, and that way it doesn't become too tight. It retains this a looseness to it. People often try to figure out how can they keep their paintings loose, and one of the ways is not to start tight. If I started tight, then the painting will get tighter and tighter, too tight. So this way, I can start out loose, and then I can start to define things things that I want to define, and things I want to leave alone. I can just kind of like leave them alone. What's nice about this paint is that you can keep working. It was good to have put the background in before, because now you can see like the lines going down, but it's just like a nice even feeling of the lines going behind the the heads because I didn't worry about whether or not the paint went over the heads, because I could always go back and paint the heads again. And those heads kind of like create like a pattern motif also. That's like the idea of like the group, people working as together in a group. It's not no more or less like it's not so much a group portrait, but it's a group working together and singing together as they do in the choir, where they come together as a group and define a single whole as far as their sound is and their tone. And sometimes we have to come together to produce one nice, loud volume or one nice voice when we can try to do it by ourselves, but when we come together as a group, we have much more power and much more authority in the sound of things. So often painting goes deeper than just a formula approach, but also into the context of why a person would paint in a particular way. So here it's not just a formula, although you have some of those formalistic approaches, but it's also the context, the expression of what's being said in the image. One thing about art also is that the process of just laying paint down and pushing paint around on the surface is just as much joy you get from that as the end results. So part of the process is that's probably one of the reasons why it helps us to go back to the process of working on a painting. Just going back in here, felt that it needed some areas where it defined some of the images, like around the shoulders and the necks, to kind of bring that out a little bit. But it's like, although it's figurative, it's almost like working in the abstract way. You're constantly trying to figure out what your next move will be. Here we're just kind of putting some highlights in the hair, showing some of the light coming down from a direction from the right down. And one thing about this paint, the gouache, it goes on, it looks light now, but then when it dries darker, so then it looks right after it dries. Sometimes what I'll also do is instead of just using like a monochromatic theme, I might put in some color in there. I might put a little blue in there in the hair along with the brown, just to kind of give it a little flavor. I like working with gouache. I wasn't a medium of my choice in the early part of my career, but now I kind of like it because I like the what it does to the surface. I think some of the areas will be have a little bit more opacity to them, and they kind of like sit up on the surface a little bit, which gives it a nice kind of surface texture to the painted surface. It's going in. It's going into the eyes. What I do is like the dark part of the eye, I leave it alone, and then I do like what we would call the whites of the eye, which is I'm just using like a light, like a gray, and then the eye itself will come out. Watch some of those things with some of the paintings where they use underpainting, and then they put in establish the darks, and then they kind of like work around those darks and bring out some of the structure, especially like around the eye and the nose and things like that. What's probably good is that because of the size, because it's small, I'm forced to use, I'm not using like a small brush, super small brush. I'm using like a somewhat large brush to scale of the size of the heads. So if I were to paint this at a large scale, I would probably use a larger brush so that I can achieve the same type of effects. So I'm close to finishing now, taking off the tape. This is what I call the revealing. And for some reason it always looks nice when you take and unveil it, and you can see the finished work. So I can zoom in a little bit so you can see it.